Tonight, Saddam Hussein in custody and talking some. We'll tell you what he's saying, take you to where he was hiding, and give you the latest on how he was finally caught and what happens next. From President Bush, Saddam gets the promise of a fair trial and a personal message.
Good riddance.
And you'll meet some of the proudest folks in the USA tonight. Their hero husbands captured Saddam.
This is the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather reporting from CBS News headquarters in New York.
Good evening. Now that we have him, what do we do with him? That is the question for the Bush administration as Saddam Hussein is held tonight at an undisclosed location. It's just one of the questions CBS will try to answer tonight as we devote much of the broadcast to the capture of the ousted Iraqi dictator. Where will he be tried and by whom? Will he face the death penalty? What does his capture mean for attacks in Iraq on U.S. troops? But first, what is Saddam telling his interrogators? CBS's Kimberly Dozier in Baghdad has some answers to that.
CBS News has been told that Saddam Hussein is being held in Iraq, where he's being questioned by his American captors. Sometimes sarcastic, always defiant, he's denied harboring weapons of mass destruction or any links to the terrorist group Al-Qaeda. And he won't answer any direct questions about the militant movement he had cheered on from hiding. But the documents he had with him and some inadvertent comments he's made have led to another major arrest today.
We were able to take some of that and use it to go after a couple of key individuals within the city of Baghdad.
Who'd you get?
I'd rather not say right now.
Someone high
But it's
up.
high, very high.
He would say it's a former regime member who coordinated and bankrolled terrorist attacks throughout Baghdad. And the general said it would lead to more arrests, but not necessarily to less violence from the militants.
It may rock them back on their heels. It may cause them to try and do some fast attacks to show that they're still out there.
Today, there were 2 more car bombs at 2 police stations in Baghdad, killing at least 8 Iraqis. U.S. troops are braced for more.
There could be attacks on us at any time.
Iraqis, too, know the battle for their country goes on. Perhaps that's why celebrations here have been muted. Many can't believe he's gone. The man who terrorized their country, taken without a fight. 4 Iraqi governing council members who met him last night say he was foul-mouthed and sometimes incoherent.
Very demoralized, psychologically ruined man. He was a really broken person when we saw him. But despite all this, he was defiant, unrepentant, and has no remorse.
Saddam called the Iraqi people ignorant thugs. It's those Iraqis who may now pass judgment on him. Some are already calling for death. Some Iraqis want to see him tried in an Iraqi court of law as soon as possible. The Americans say they have plenty of questions left to ask. First, Dan?
Kimberly Dozier reporting live from Baghdad. We don't know exactly where Saddam was these past few months, but we do know his final hiding place, a small opening hole in the ground on a farm in the village of Adwar near Tikrit. After getting a first-hand look today, CBS's Thalia Shuras has a kind of tour of the place for you.
Out of the camouflage of an orange grove on a poor farm like so many others in the Tikrit region, Saddam was literally unearthed from this narrow hole in the ground. His hands emerged first. His first words were in broken English.
He said that I'm Saddam Hussein. I am the president of Iraq, and I'm willing to negotiate. And then the response from the U.S. soldiers was President Bush sends his regards.
The hole was plugged by a styrofoam rock concealed by a carpet.
Actually, one of the U.S. soldiers that was here was standing on top of that and didn't have a clue at the time.
The compound was described in more detail today. From a brick archway, a short courtyard led to a hut housing a small kitchen and a bedroom. In close proximity was the spider hole with a 3-foot-deep entranceway. The space, enough for one person to lie flat, was 6 to 8 feet long by 4 to 5 feet high. Vents provided oxygen, but it wasn't exactly what the assault forces expected.
What we found surprised us. We didn't think it would be so humble and simple.
Saddam's entire hideaway, a two-room crumbling adobe hut, was surprising in its squalor. In the makeshift kitchen, half-eaten food lay on the filthy floor. Bananas, apples, and chocolate bars littered what might pass for countertops. The bedroom, a mess of blankets, still packaged underwear, slippers, and shampoo, even a jar of moisturizer. Just a few feet from the crawl space in which the former president of Iraq was found is this trail. It leads to the Tigris River. The military believes it may have been a supply route or an escape route. At the end of that path lay a small boat. In the past, it might have helped Saddam make his getaway. Not this time.
We're all just trying to still digest the fact that he's captured, you know. I mean, even though you see it with your own eyes, you know, you're sitting down thinking at night, wow.
Thalia Ashuras, CBS News, Tikrit, Iraq.
The capture of Saddam marks a high point in the presidency of George Bush, who had vowed to bring the dictator to justice. President Bush called in reporters today to talk about Saddam and what he believes should happen to him. CBS's John Roberts was at the news conference.
Riding a political high from Saddam Hussein's capture, President Bush made no effort to hide his disdain for the Iraqi leader today.
Good riddance. The world is better off without you, Mr. Saddam Hussein.
Mr. Bush had high praise for the troops who captured him and nothing but ridicule for Saddam.
I find it very interesting that when the heat got on, you dug yourself a hole and you crawled in it.
Though the White House isn't yet sure what to do with Saddam, President Bush insisted he'll receive a fair trial that will stand up to world scrutiny. As for whether he'd like to see Saddam executed,
I've got my own personal views of how he ought to be treated, but I'm not an Iraqi citizen. It's going to be up to the Iraqis to make those decisions.
the president indicated Saddam's capture may not be the intelligence bonanza the U.S. had hoped for, saying he can't be trusted to tell the truth. Other administration officials wonder if Saddam ever knew the whole picture of his weapons program, and they certainly don't think he was in any position to be masterminding attacks against the coalition. Mr. Bush also strayed briefly into the presidential campaign today, rejecting Democratic charges that his efforts to put together an Iraqi government by next June are driven by an election year timetable. And he denounced Howard Dean's recent suggestion that he was warned in advance by Saudi Arabia of the 9/11 attacks.
It's an absurd insinuation.
The year would appear to be ending on a high note for President Bush, but he cautioned today attacks on U.S. troops in Iraq may actually increase in the coming weeks. A warning that the afterglow of Saddam Hussein's capture may be short-lived. Dan?
John Roberts at the White House. Now we want to take a closer look on the upcoming trial of Saddam. How and when it might happen, who will try him, and will he face a possible death penalty? CBS News correspondent Bob Orr has been looking into all of that.
Senior Bush administration officials say Saddam Hussein will likely remain in the custody of the U.S. military until a new sovereign Iraqi government is established. And when Saddam is finally handed over for trial, President Bush says the Iraqi people should be the ones to hold their former president accountable.
They were the people that were brutalized by this man. He murdered them, he gassed them, he tortured them, he had rape rooms, and they need to be very much involved in the process.
The U.S. and its coalition partners have not ruled out an international war crimes tribunal, like the one currently hearing the case against former Yugoslav leader Slobodan Milosevic. But a trial for Saddam inside Iraq would be far more politically palatable.
At its foundation, this has to be justice provided by the Iraqi people. It shouldn't be seen as victor's justice. It should be seen as justice done by those who are most aggrieved by Saddam's crimes.
A special court inside Iraq would have the authority to charge Saddam with genocide for the gassing of the Kurds and for crimes against humanity, for overseeing torture chambers and ordering executions. But legal experts say for an Iraqi trial to be credible, it must be public before neutral judges. Saddam must have qualified counsel, and facts, not vengeance or outside pressure from Saddam's enemies, must guide the proceedings.
The reality is that proving all of these things won't necessarily be easy. That people were gassed is unquestionable. Who gassed them remains a point of controversy. And I think Saddam is very likely to argue that he wasn't responsible for it.
Keeping the trial inside Iraq also leaves open the possibility of a death sentence, something that would likely be off the table if Saddam were to be tried by an international court.
Dan?
Bob Orr reporting live from our Washington bureau. Iraqis may have felt most keenly about seeing a dazed and disheveled Saddam Hussein in American custody without a fight. But reaction was nearly as intense throughout the Arab world. As CBS's Mark Phillips reports, many Arabs saw the capture of a tyrant as the fall of a hero.
The capture of Saddam Hussein was not celebrated everywhere. Palestinians whose cause he had supported with words and money now know their patron will not return.
Many people feel sad. As a human, I feel bad when I see Saddam Hussein.
Across the Arab world, the image so carefully nurtured over the years of Saddam the Defiant has now been replaced by Saddam the Defeated. The man who had strutted the Middle Eastern landscape like a colossus and urged the Arab nation to resist the American invader had chosen not to fire his gun when it counted.
All the images, or most of the images, which Saddam created for himself tended to stress the idea of bravery, that Saddam is courageous, that Saddam is a hero. And this politics of over-relying on images is backfiring.
But while many in the Arab world may have been quietly relieved at Saddam's capture, for others the image of an Arab champion sheepishly submitting to a humiliating medical exam was taken as an insult to Arab pride.
We have a front page editorial here, say it is a new insult to the Arabs.
And already in that Middle Eastern way, the conspiracy theories have begun to circulate. That Saddam the Courageous would only have behaved this way if he'd been drugged or otherwise subdued.
Many people now believe that he was stunned.
Stunned?
Yes. They believe that the man would fight.
After decades of brutality, even images like these will not exorcise Saddam's influence from Iraq. In the end, the myth of Saddam may be more difficult to subdue than the man himself. Mark Phillips, CBS News, London.
Coming up next here on the CBS Evening News, how did U.S. forces finally gut Saddam? Long, hard intelligence gathering, and one final tip. We'll take you step by step through the entire operation in tonight's Inside Story. We're learning more and more about how U.S. intelligence and U.S. forces finally tracked down and captured Saddam Hussein after some 8.5 months of frustration. CBS News national security correspondent David Martin has been working his sources, and tonight he gives you the inside story.
Saddam Hussein was given up by a member of his own clan, a man U.S. forces had been hunting for a week after the CIA identified him as one of Saddam's henchmen. A man with inside knowledge, he was also related to some of the former dictator's bodyguards.
There was something about his background that drew our initial interest in him. We were very much interested in talking to that individual.
The still unnamed henchman won't receive any of the $25 million reward on Saddam's head because he was, to say the least, a reluctant witness. But his information was so valuable, some of the Iraqis who helped U.S. forces find him might be rewarded. Beginning on December 4th, Colonel James Hickey and the rest of the 4th Infantry Division conducted a series of raids in and around Tikrit, never finding their man, but becoming ever more convinced he held the key to Saddam's whereabouts.
We did find $1.9 million, so we knew we were on a good trail.
Last Friday, he was finally captured in Baghdad. By Saturday morning, he was under interrogation in Tikrit, describing the farm where Saddam might be hiding. The 4th Infantry Division had been to the farm before and found nothing. But this time, aerial surveillance spotted a taxicab exactly like the one seen on the streets of Baghdad. Another sign Saddam was there.
Even during the war, we had information that he moved around Baghdad in a taxicab, and in fact, some nights even slept in a taxicab.
When Hickey and his men got the order to raid the farm, they knew that if the tipster was telling the truth, they would find Saddam. But they had been disappointed before.
We have conducted raids against Saddam Hussein numerous times. In some of those cases, I think we were very close.
This time, everything broke their way, allowing them to sneak up on the farm undetected as soon as the sun set.
There was zero illumination since the moon had not risen, and just prior to our arrival into Adwar, as good fortune would have it, the power went out in the city.
At 8 p.m., they assaulted the farm, and by 8:30, Saddam was in custody. It's better to be lucky than good, the saying goes. This time, U.S. forces were both. David Martin, CBS News, the Pentagon.
Most Democrats critical of President Bush's handling of the war on terror still praise the capture of Saddam Hussein, but presidential hopeful Howard Dean said that, contrary to what President Bush said at his news conference today, quote, the capture of Saddam Hussein has not made America safer, unquote. New York's Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton said it offers, quote, a new opportunity to bring more nations into the Iraq rebuilding process. Still ahead on the CBS Evening News, capturing Saddam was big news worldwide, but even bigger for the families of Fort Hood, home of the Army's 4th Infantry. You will see and hear from them later. There's another setback tonight for Democrats in their battle to take back control of the U.S. Senate. Senator John Breaux, a middle-of-the-road Democrat from Louisiana, announced today he will not run for a 4th term next year. Breaux, who recently helped broker the new Medicare law, is the 5th Southern Democratic senator to announce he'll retire. The U.S. Supreme Court agreed today to settle the fight over Vice President Cheney's secretive contacts with the energy industry. The court will decide whether records from the Cheney-led task force that drafted the Bush administration's energy policy must be made public. Secretary of State Colin Powell had surgery today for prostate cancer. His doctors say the operation to remove the prostate gland went well. The cancer had not spread, and Powell is expected to make a full recovery. Powell is 66 years old. The State Department says he'll follow a reduced schedule at least for a while. The family of the late Senator Strom Thurmond today acknowledged a California woman's claim that she is the daughter of Thurmond and a black woman. Over the weekend, 78-year-old Essie Mae Washington Williams said her mother was Thurmond's family maid. Thurmond, who began his political career as a segregationist, died in June at age 100. 60 Minutes 2 intends to have an exclusive interview with the woman Wednesday night. In New Jersey, a former nurse who claims he killed dozens of hospital patients over 16 years was charged today with murder. Authorities say Charles Cullen, 43, told them he gave lethal drugs to as many as 40 quote, very sick patients in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. He said he did it to ease their pain and suffering. Cullen is so far charged with just one murder. Coming up next year on the CBS Evening News, the capture of Saddam. Folks at this Texas military base have many special reasons to celebrate. You'll see why when we come back.
His daughter died after taking RU-486, the so-called abortion drug. Now he's on a crusade.
What we're concerned about is the health and welfare of young women and our teenagers, our daughters.
So what went wrong, and is the treatment really safe? We'll have the inside story tomorrow on the CBS Evening News with Dan.
Now look at some of the stories we were working on for later this week. Tomorrow, new questions about the safety of the controversial abortion drug RU-486. Later, model trains are big sellers this time of year, but are customers paying too much for them? And watch out for knockoffs. CBS's Friday Consumer Alert warns of a flood of counterfeit gift items. Finally tonight, following word that Saddam Hussein was in U.S. hands, President Bush and his aides declared the White House a no-gloat zone. But whatever you want to call it, happiness, relief, and pride did apply to the 4th Infantry Division troops in Iraq, who celebrated the successful end of their long hunt. And as CBS's Bob McNamara reports, so did the home folks at Fort Hood, Texas.
It was a world-class capture, a world away.
And it was like he had won the lottery.
Kelly Womack's husband, Sergeant Joey Womack, was there when Saddam was pulled out of hiding.
Just being there doing the missions was enough, but this, I don't think there's anything in our life that will ever top that. It's just amazing.
Food, necessities, mainly the stuff he can eat.
Dana Marovich, like other spouses shipping care packages, sense a seismic shift among their spouses at war now.
They know there's still danger, but for morale, he said soldiers were high-fiving and, you know, like, yes, yes, but they have a long ways to go.
Here, Stars and Stripes swaddle churches.
We have some great news.
And pawn shops echo that news.
A lot of relief and just, you know, an overall good feeling, I think.
It is not forgotten that Fort Hood has paid heavily in the hunt for Saddam. 40 soldiers from this base have died in Iraq, 30 of them killed in action in the 4th ID alone. And at a time when the war was being questioned, Colonel James Hickey led the operation that found Saddam.
It's a terrific Christmas present. Couldn't ask for a better one, so.
Maureen Hickey says families worried and waiting for husbands to return months from now have hope again.
It's a huge boost for the spouses who are looking at upcoming Christmas season that was somewhat depressing, and this, I think, is a boost that's just going to put them over and get them through that.
Today, 20,000 more troops are rehearsing for their mission in Iraq. And when they leave, thousands of new yellow ribbons will go up in an Army town no stranger to war. Bob McNamara, CBS News, Fort Hood, Texas.
And that's part of our world tonight. For the CBS Evening News, Dan Rather reporting. See you tomorrow. Good night.
For news 24 hours a day, click on CBSNews.com. Brought to you in part by Walmart. Giving, helping, doing. Because we live here too, and we believe good works. The trouble with the abortion drug RU486 tomorrow. Experience CBS News.